Commander Taeho pressed his face against the cold metal of the observation window. Outside, space looked different today. The stars seemed dimmer, hidden behind shadows that should not exist. His hands shook as he counted the alien ships hanging in the darkness above Earth's moon. 1,000 vessels, each one larger than Earth's biggest space station. They had appeared without warning 3 hours ago, emerging from what looked like tears in space itself. The silence on the bridge felt heavy. Nobody wanted to be the first to speak. Lieutenant Hai Jin sat at her communication station, her fingers dancing over glowing buttons. Static filled the speakers around them. Then came sounds that made everyone's skin crawl. Clicking noises, harsh breathing. Something that might have been laughter but sounded more like metal scraping against stone. "Sir," Hyojin whispered, "I think they're trying to talk to us." The translation computers had been working for 2 hours. Earth's best linguists were helping from the surface. Slowly, the alien sounds began to form words that humans could understand. When the first complete sentence came through the speakers, the entire bridge went quiet. "Greetings, primitive ones. You have been selected for the grand hunt. Prepare your champions." Taeho closed his eyes. In all the years humanity had dreamed of meeting aliens, nobody had imagined this. The voice that spoke was cold and amused, like a cat speaking to a mouse before playing with it. Admiral So-young's face appeared on the main screen. She looked older than she had that morning. Dark circles under her eyes showed she had not slept since the aliens arrived. Behind her, Taeho could see other officers running back and forth. Earth's military commanders were trying to figure out what to do. "Report, Commander," So-young said. Her voice stayed steady, but Taeho knew her well enough to hear the fear underneath. "The alien fleet maintains position above Luna, Admiral. No hostile action yet, but their message suggests they want some kind of combat." More clicking sounds came through the speakers. Hyojin worked quickly to translate. "They're sending more information, sir." "Something about rules?" The translation that followed made everyone's blood run cold. The aliens called themselves the Valdari Empire. They had traveled across space for what they called recreational warfare. They found planets with intelligent life and forced the inhabitants to fight for their entertainment. The rules were simple and terrible. Each planet had to provide 1,000 of their best fighters. These champions would face Valdari warriors in single combat. If the planet's fighters won enough battles, the aliens would leave them alone. If they lost, their entire world would burn. "How many battles do we need to win?" Admiral So-young asked when the message finished. Hyojin looked pale as she read the answer. "They don't say, Admiral. The message just says we must provide adequate entertainment." Down in the xenobiology lab, Dr. Minseo was studying everything the computers could tell them about their visitors. What she found made her wish she had chosen a different career. The Valdari were not just technologically advanced. They were physically superior to humans in every way that mattered for combat. Each Valdari warrior stood 3 meters tall. Their bones were denser than human bones. Their muscles were stronger. Their reflexes were faster. They had 4 arms instead of 2. Their skin could stop bullets that would kill a human instantly. Minseo called Admiral So-young with her findings. "Admiral, we need to understand something. These aren't just aliens with better weapons. They're built for fighting in ways that humans are not. A Valdari child could probably defeat our strongest soldier." The selection process began immediately. Every military base on Earth received the same order. "Find your best fighters. Find them now." Time was running out. Captain Jiwoo got the call while training new recruits at the Seoul Military Academy. He had fought in 3 wars and survived battles that killed most of his friends. Now he was being asked to die for his planet against enemies that were practically invincible. But he did not hesitate. Within 6 hours, he was on a transport ship, heading to the orbital facility where Earth's champions would gather. Around him sat the finest warriors humanity could find: Special Forces soldiers, professional fighters, Olympic athletes, people who had spent their entire lives learning how to win physical contests against other humans. They all knew the truth that nobody wanted to say out loud. They were not being chosen because they could win. They were being chosen because they would die bravely. Sergeant Dong-hyun sat across from Jiwoo on the transport. He had won more hand-to-hand combat tournaments than anyone else in the Korean military. His fists could break concrete blocks. His speed was legendary among soldiers who knew about such things. But even he looked scared. "Captain," Dong-hyun said quietly, "what do you think our chances are?" Jiwoo looked around the transport at the other fighters. Each one was the best their country could offer. Each one had trained their entire life for combat. Each one would probably be dead within a week. I think our chances are exactly what they've always been, Sergeant. We fight until we can't fight anymore. We make them remember that humans don't give up easily. Back on the command ship, more information was coming through about the Valdari Empire. They had been conducting these grand hunts for thousands of years. 17 different civilizations had been conquered this way. The aliens kept detailed records of every fight, every victory, every species they had destroyed. The records showed that some species had managed to win individual battles. A few had even won several dozen fights, but none had ever won enough to save their planet. The Valdari always won in the end. Lieutenant Hyejin discovered something else in the alien transmissions. The Valdari were not just warriors. They were entertainers. The grand hunt was broadcast across their empire. Billions of aliens watched and bet on the outcomes. The deaths of entire civilizations were turned into a sport. They're not even angry at us, she told Taeho. We're just the latest show for them to watch. The first transport ships began arriving at the orbital arena the aliens had constructed. In just 2 days, they had built a structure larger than most Earth cities. Crystal walls rose from a metal frame that seemed to bend space around itself. Fighting platforms floated in the center, surrounded by seats for thousands of alien spectators. As the human fighters looked up at their destination, they realized they were not just fighting for Earth's survival. They were about to become entertainment for creatures who saw the destruction of entire worlds as an amusing way to spend an afternoon. The grand hunt would begin tomorrow. Earth's champions were as ready as they could be, but everyone knew that ready would probably not be enough. The shuttle doors opened with a hiss that echoed through the massive alien structure. Captain Jiwoo stepped out first, his boots making strange clicking sounds on the crystal floor. The arena was even bigger than it had looked from outside. The ceiling stretched so high that clouds formed near the top. Floating platforms hung in the air like islands, each one surrounded by empty space that would mean certain death if someone fell. Behind Jiwoo, 99 other human fighters walked in silence. They carried the best weapons Earth could provide, but everything looked small and primitive inside this place. The walls around them seemed to be alive, shifting colors from blue to green to deep purple. Strange music played from speakers they could not see, full of sounds that hurt their ears. Corporal Yoonji stayed close to her squad leader, Sergeant Dong Hyun. She had won 3 national martial arts championships before joining the military. Her reflexes were faster than almost any human alive, but her hands still shook as she looked around the arena. This place was built for death, and everyone knew it. Thousands of aliens filled the seats that rose up the walls like a giant bowl. The Valdari were even more frightening in person than in the videos Earth scientists had studied. Each one stood 3 meters tall with 4 arms that ended in clawed hands. Their skin looked like metal that had been polished until it shone. They wore robes covered in patterns that moved and changed as you watched them. The noise they made was worse than their appearance. Clicking sounds filled the air as they talked to each other. Sometimes one would make a sound like screaming metal that other aliens seemed to find funny. They were laughing, Yoonji realized. They were already laughing at the humans who were about to die for their entertainment. Dr. Jae-sung watched from the human observation deck, a small platform near one wall, where Earth's military officers could monitor the fights. He had equipment to record everything that happened, but he wondered if anyone would be alive to read his reports. Through his binoculars, he studied the Valdari champions who were preparing for battle. Each alien warrior wore armor that seemed to flow like liquid metal while still protecting them completely. Their weapons were things that human science could not explain. Energy swords that cut through the air itself, guns that shot beams of light hot enough to melt steel, shields that appeared from nowhere when they were needed. But Dr. Jae-sung was a scientist, and he noticed things that soldiers might miss. The way the alien champions moved was different from their audience. They were professionals, but they were also performers. Every gesture was designed to look impressive. Every weapon was chosen to create a good show. The first fight began with sounds like thunder rolling across the arena. Sergeant Dong Hyun walked onto the center platform, carrying his combat knife and sidearm. The Valdari champion that faced him was covered in black armor decorated with silver spikes. It carried 4 different weapons, one in each hand. The alien moved like water flowing downhill. Every step was perfectly placed. Every attack came from the exact right angle. Dong-hyun was fast and skilled, but he looked like he was moving through thick mud compared to his opponent. The fight lasted 37 seconds, but something unexpected happened in those 37 seconds. As the alien's energy sword cut through Dong-hyun's chest armor, the sergeant managed one last desperate attack. His combat knife found a gap in the alien's armor near the shoulder joint. The blade went deep enough to draw bright blue blood. The Valdari champion stumbled backward, looking down at the wound with what might have been surprise. It had been hurt by a primitive weapon wielded by a creature it considered barely intelligent. The alien touched the wound with one of its free hands, then looked at the blue blood on its fingers. The crowd's reaction was immediate and strange. Instead of anger at seeing their champion hurt, they made excited clicking sounds. They leaned forward in their seats, talking rapidly to each other. Some stood up to get a better view of the wounded warrior. Dr. Jae-sung made rapid notes. The aliens were not upset that a human had managed to wound their champion. If anything, they seemed pleased. This was not the behavior of a species that saw humans as worthless insects. This was the behavior of an audience that wanted to see a good show. The second human fighter was Specialist Bo-ram, a woman who had spent 10 years studying every martial art she could find. She was smaller than Dong-hyun but faster, and she had watched his fight carefully. When her Valdari opponent raised its energy sword for a killing blow, she was ready. Bo-ram rolled under the attack and came up behind the alien. Her knife found the same weak spot that Dong-hyun had discovered, but she twisted the blade and held on, causing much more damage. Bright blue blood sprayed across the platform as the alien roared in pain and fury. The crowd went wild. Clicking sounds filled the arena like applause. Some aliens were on their feet, waving their forearms in excitement. Others were making rapid gestures that looked like they were placing bets on what would happen next. Bo-ram's fight lasted 2 minutes and 14 seconds. When she finally fell, she had wounded her opponent in 3 different places. The Valdari champion needed medical attention before leaving the platform. The alien medical team that came to help moved quickly, but they also seemed excited rather than concerned. By the 5th fight, patterns were becoming clear to the humans watching from their observation deck. The Valdari champions were not simply trying to kill their opponents as quickly as possible. They were drawing out the fights, testing human responses, giving the audience time to appreciate what they were seeing. Private Suho discovered this when his opponent had him cornered on one edge of the platform. The alien could have finished the fight with a single energy blast. Instead, it waited, gesturing for Suho to attack first. When the human threw his knife with perfect accuracy, the alien deflected it just enough to avoid serious damage while still allowing the blade to cut its armor. The crowd loved it. They were cheering for both fighters now, making sounds of approval when Suho showed skill and sounds of excitement when the Valdari demonstrated superior technique. This was not an execution. It was a performance, and both sides were expected to play their parts well. Suho managed something that no human had done yet. When his opponent tried to knock him off the platform with a sweeping attack, Suho grabbed one of the alien's arms and used its own momentum against it. For a few seconds, the massive Valdari warrior was off balance, struggling to avoid falling into the empty space below. The crowd exploded with noise. Even the alien champions waiting for their own fight stopped their preparations to watch. Suho had forced a Valdari warrior to retreat, something that had never happened in the recorded history of the Grand Hunt. Captain Jiwoo watched from the waiting area as more human fighters took their turns. Each one learned something from those who had fought before. Each one lasted a little longer, hurt their opponent a little more, gave the audience a better show. The Valdari were getting exactly what they wanted. But Jiwoo was beginning to suspect that what they wanted might not be what anyone had expected. Captain Yejin had always been good at seeing patterns where others saw only chaos. That skill had made her one of Earth's best intelligence officers. Now, 3 days into the Grand Hunt, she was starting to see something that made her stomach twist with both hope and fear. The Valdari were not fighting to win quickly. They were fighting to make the humans look good. She watched the morning's first battle from her position in the observation deck. Corporal Han Wool faced a Valdari champion whose armor was decorated with golden spikes. The alien carried 2 energy weapons that could have ended the fight in seconds. Instead, it held back, waiting for Han Wool to make the first move. Han Wool had been a martial arts teacher before joining the military. He understood timing and distance better than most soldiers. When the alien finally attacked, Hanwol was ready. He rolled away from the energy blast and came up throwing his combat knife with perfect accuracy. The alien could have dodged easily. Yejin had seen these creatures move fast enough to catch bullets. But this one moved just slowly enough to let the knife cut across its shoulder. Blue blood splattered across the crystal platform as the crowd made their excited clicking sounds. The fight continued for 8 minutes. Hanwol used every trick he had learned in 20 years of martial arts. The alien matched him move for move, always staying just strong enough to be challenging but never overwhelming him completely. When Hanwol finally fell, he had wounded his opponent in 4 different places. The crowd loved every second of it. Dr. Subin was watching from her laboratory deep inside Earth's command ship. She had been studying every second of video from the arena fights, looking for weaknesses in Valdari combat techniques. What she found was much more disturbing than simple military intelligence. The aliens were not just recording these fights for their own entertainment. They were broadcasting them live across their entire empire. Billions of Valdari were watching humans die, and they were treating it like a sports event. There were betting systems, commentary tracks, and instant replays of the most exciting moments. Subin discovered that different types of human fighters were becoming popular with different alien audiences. Martial artists who used creative techniques got high ratings. Soldiers who showed tactical thinking earned respect from Valdari military viewers. Athletes who demonstrated pure physical skill attracted younger alien fans. The humans were not just fighting for their lives. They were unknowingly creating entertainment content for a civilization that saw the death of entire species as an amusing way to spend an afternoon. But the most disturbing discovery came when Subin analyzed the Valdari champions themselves. Their fighting styles were changing. After watching human fighters for 3 days, the aliens were starting to incorporate human techniques into their own combat methods. They were learning creativity and unpredictability from their supposed victims. Lieutenant Jinnah realized this during her own fight on the afternoon of the 3rd day. Her opponent was a Valdari warrior whose armor changed colors like a rainbow. It carried weapons that shifted shape as she watched, becoming whatever tool would make the best show. The alien attacked with traditional Valdari precision, but when Jinnah responded with an unexpected counterattack, her opponent immediately adapted. It started fighting like a human would fight, using deception and misdirection instead of raw power and speed. Jinnah had trained in boxing before joining the military. She knew how to read an opponent's intentions from small movements and breathing patterns, but this alien was reading her the same way, learning her techniques even as they fought. When Jinnah feinted left and struck right, the alien was ready. When she tried a combination punch that had won her 3 amateur championships, the alien countered with a move that looked like it came from human martial arts textbooks. The fight lasted 12 minutes. Jinnah lost, but she also learned something that changed everything she thought she knew about their situation. The Valdari were not just superior beings playing with inferior creatures. They were students learning from teachers they had not expected to find. Major Kyung-soo gathered the surviving human fighters that evening. 47 had fought so far, 47 had died, but every single one had taught their alien opponent something new. Every death had been turned into a lesson that the Valdari absorbed and used to improve their own skills. They are not trying to exterminate us quickly, Kyung-soo told the remaining fighters. They want us to last as long as possible. They want us to teach them things they cannot learn anywhere else. The group sat in silence thinking about what this meant. Sergeant Minkyu was the first to speak. He had been scheduled to fight the next morning and expected to die within minutes of stepping onto the platform. If they want entertainment, Minkyu said slowly, then maybe we can give them more entertainment than they expected. The idea that grew from that conversation was dangerous and desperate. The humans began talking about fighting not to win, but to teach. If the Valdari wanted to learn from human combat techniques, then the humans would make sure those lessons came with surprises the aliens were not prepared for. Corporal Young Mi volunteered to test this theory. She was a demolitions expert who understood explosives better than anyone else in the human force. Her plan was simple and terrifying. She would not try to defeat her Valdari opponent with superior fighting skill. Instead, she would turn the fight into a puzzle that the alien would want to solve. The next morning, Young Mi entered the arena carrying standard military equipment. But hidden in her gear were components that could be assembled into things the Valdari had never seen before. Not weapons designed to kill, but tools designed to surprise and confuse. Her opponent was a Valdari champion covered in silver armor that reflected the arena lights like mirrors. It carried traditional energy weapons and moved with the fluid grace that all alien fighters demonstrated. But young Mi was not planning a traditional fight. When the battle began, young Mi did something no human had tried before. She started building something on the platform while dodging her opponent's attacks. Using pieces of her equipment, she assembled a device that the alien could not identify or understand. The Valdari champion stopped attacking and moved closer to examine what young Mi was creating. The crowd grew quiet as they tried to figure out what they were watching. This was not combat as they understood it. This was something entirely new. Young Mi finished her device and activated it. Bright lights flashed across the platform in patterns that hurt alien eyes adapted to different wavelengths. Sounds echoed through the arena at frequencies that made the Valdari audience uncomfortable. For 30 seconds, the entire arena was filled with chaos that only humans found bearable. When the lights and sounds stopped, young Mi stood facing her opponent across the platform. The alien had not been hurt, but it had been completely surprised. For the first time in the history of the Grand Hunt, a Valdari champion had no idea what to do next. The crowd erupted in sounds unlike anything the humans had heard before. It was not the clicking of excitement or the metal scraping of laughter. It was something new, something that might have been respect. Young Mi's opponent put down its weapons and walked toward her with empty hands. When it reached her, the alien did something unprecedented. It bowed, lowering its massive head in acknowledgement of a lesson learned. The fight was over, but nobody had died. For the first time in Valdari history, a Grand Hunt battle had ended with mutual respect instead of death. The second week of the Grand Hunt began with something that had never happened before in Valdari history. Humans were winning fights. Sergeant So-Jin stepped onto the morning platform carrying nothing but her standard military knife and a backpack full of what looked like junk. Her opponent was a massive Valdari warrior, whose purple armor was covered in symbols that seemed to move when you looked at them directly. The alien carried weapons that hummed with deadly energy. But So-Jin had spent the previous night talking to young Mi about the lesson they had all learned. The Valdari wanted entertainment more than they wanted quick victories. They wanted to learn things they had never seen before. So-Jin was going to give them exactly that. When the fight began, So-Jin did something that confused everyone watching. She pretended to be badly hurt by the alien's first attack, stumbling backward and dropping her knife. The Valdari champion moved closer, probably planning to end the fight with a dramatic finishing move that would please the crowd. That was exactly what So-Jin had been waiting for. She rolled away from the alien's downward strike and came up behind it with a piece of metal pipe from her backpack. But instead of trying to hurt her opponent, she used the pipe to tangle the energy cables that connected the alien's weapons to its armor power source. The Valdari warrior found itself holding weapons that no longer worked. Its armor began to flicker as power systems failed. For the first time in its life, a Valdari champion was fighting with nothing but its natural strength and speed. The crowd was making sounds that human ears had never heard before. It was not the clicking of excitement or the scraping of amusement. It was something that might have been surprise mixed with respect. So-Jin spent the next 10 minutes teaching her opponent how to fight without technology. She showed the alien how humans used leverage and timing to overcome stronger opponents. She demonstrated techniques that worked when you could not rely on superior equipment. By the end of the fight, both warriors were exhausted and covered in sweat and blue blood. But when So-Jin finally made a mistake that allowed her opponent to win, the alien helped her stand up before declaring victory. The crowd cheered for both of them equally. Private Wu-Jin was scheduled to fight that afternoon. He had watched So-Jin's battle carefully and understood what she had accomplished. The humans were no longer just trying to survive. They were changing what it meant to be a warrior in Valdari culture. Wu-Jin had been a puzzle solver before joining the military. He designed complex problems for computer systems and found elegant solutions to impossible challenges. His plan for the arena was the most ambitious thing any human had attempted. His opponent was a Valdari champion, whose gold armor reflected light in patterns that hurt human eyes. It carried traditional weapons and moved with the fluid precision that all alien fighters demonstrated. But Wu-Jin was not planning to fight this creature in any traditional way. When the battle began, Wu-Jin started rearranging objects on the platform. He moved metal barriers, repositioned energy sources, and created obstacles that forced his opponent to solve increasingly complex problems just to reach him. Every time the alien found a way through one challenge, Wu Jin created a new one. The platform became a giant puzzle that changed every few minutes. The Valdari champion had to use its intelligence as much as its strength, finding creative solutions to problems it had never encountered before. The crowd was fascinated. They had never seen combat that required this kind of thinking. Warriors in their culture were trained to be strong and fast and precise. But Wu Jin was showing them that fighting could also be about intelligence and creativity, and the ability to adapt to unexpected situations. The battle lasted 26 minutes. When Wu Jin finally lost, his opponent stood over him for a long moment, then did something that shocked everyone in the arena. The alien removed its helmet and spoke directly to the human in words that the translation system could understand. "You have taught me things that my masters never knew," the Valdari champion said. "I am honored to have fought you." Captain Minho watched these victories from the human observation deck and realized that something fundamental was changing. The original plan had been for Earth's champions to die bravely, giving humanity some dignity in defeat. But the humans were not just dying bravely. They were winning, and their victories were having effects that nobody had predicted. Dr. Heywan had been monitoring Valdari communications since the Grand Hunt began. What she discovered in the second week made her rush to find Admiral So Young with urgent news. "Admiral, we have a problem," Heywan said as she burst into the command center. "The human victories are causing political chaos in the Valdari Empire." The intercepted alien communications told a story that explained everything the humans had been seeing in the arena. Valdari society was built around the idea that their warriors were naturally superior to all other life forms in the galaxy. The Grand Hunt was not just entertainment. It was proof that the Valdari deserved to rule over lesser species. But humans were proving that lesser species could be creative and intelligent and adaptable in ways that Valdari warriors were not. Every human victory was evidence that the basic assumptions of alien civilization might be wrong. Young Valdari were watching the fights and asking questions that made their elders uncomfortable. If humans could develop new fighting techniques so quickly, what else might they be able to do? If primitive species could teach advanced warriors new skills, what did that say about who was really primitive? Some alien worlds were reporting that their populations were becoming interested in human culture. They wanted to learn about the species that could turn hopeless battles into teaching opportunities. They wanted to understand how creatures with inferior technology could develop superior creativity. Corporal Young Mai made another discovery during her second fight of the week. The Valdari champions were not just learning human techniques during individual battles. They were sharing what they learned with other alien fighters. Her opponent that day was a warrior who used combat moves that looked exactly like things other humans had demonstrated in previous fights. The alien had been studying video recordings, practicing techniques that it had learned from watching human defeats. But young Mi was also learning from other human fighters. She used puzzle-solving methods that Wu Jin had pioneered, and deception techniques that So Jin had perfected. The humans were creating a shared knowledge base just as quickly as the aliens were. The result was fights that looked nothing like the traditional Grand Hunt battles that Valdari audiences expected. These were contests between two species that were teaching each other how to be better warriors while they fought. By the end of the second week, humans had won 12 fights outright and drawn 6 others in mutual respect. More importantly, they had changed the entire nature of what the Grand Hunt was supposed to accomplish. The aliens were no longer proving their superiority over inferior species. They were discovering that cooperation and learning could be more valuable than domination and conquest. The question that nobody could answer was what would happen when the Valdari High Command realized that their ancient tradition was being transformed into something completely different. The third week of the Grand Hunt began with an event that would be remembered across the galaxy for centuries. Private Seung-ho walked onto the combat platform, looked at his Valdari opponent, and did something that no warrior in the history of either species had ever attempted. He laid down his weapons and raised his empty hands. The arena fell completely silent. 20,000 alien spectators stopped their clicking and scraping sounds. Even the Valdari champions waiting for their own fight stood motionless, unsure of what they were witnessing. Seung-ho's opponent was a warrior whose black armor was decorated with silver lightning patterns. It carried energy weapons that could have vaporized a human instantly. But instead of attacking, the alien tilted its massive head to one side, studying the small creature that stood defenseless before it. "I want to teach you something," Shung-Ho said, his voice carried by the arena's translation system to every corner of the massive structure. "But I cannot teach you while we are trying to kill each other." The Valdari champion looked around the arena, seeking guidance from the crowd or from other alien warriors. No protocol existed for this situation. The Grand Hunt had rules for victory and defeat, for honor and shame, for life and death. But it had no rules for cooperation. Shung-Ho continued speaking, his voice steady despite the fact that he stood completely exposed before a creature that could end his life with a single movement. "In my world, warriors learn by training together. We practice against each other without trying to cause permanent harm. We share knowledge so that everyone becomes stronger." The alien finally spoke, its voice deep and rumbling through the translation speakers. "Show me." What happened next changed everything that either species thought they knew about warfare. Shung-Ho demonstrated a martial arts technique that used an opponent's weight and momentum against them. He moved slowly, explaining each step, showing how leverage could allow a smaller fighter to overcome a much larger one. The Valdari champion was fascinated. It set down its weapons and tried to copy Shung-Ho's movements. The alien's 4 arms made some techniques impossible, but they also made other moves more effective than Shung-Ho had ever seen them performed. For 20 minutes, human and alien worked together on the combat platform, while 20,000 spectators watched in complete amazement. They were not fighting. They were learning from each other, sharing skills that neither species had ever imagined possible. When Shung-Ho finally taught the alien to throw him using the technique they had been practicing, the crowd erupted in sounds that had no translation. It was not excitement or amusement or even respect. It was something entirely new in Valdari culture, the sound of minds being changed. The alien champion helped Shung-Ho to his feet after the demonstration throw. Then it did something that would be talked about in alien history books for generations. It bowed to the human and spoke words that every Valdari in the arena would remember forever. "You have taught me that strength is not about defeating others. It is about helping others become strong." Colonel Jun-Ho received an urgent message that afternoon. The Valdari High Command wanted to meet with the senior surviving human officer. This had never happened before in the 3,000-year history of the Grand Hunt. Conquered species were never invited to speak with their conquerors as equals. Jun-Ho was transported to the alien flagship, a vessel so large that Earth's entire space fleet could have fit inside its cargo bays. He walked through corridors that seemed to stretch for kilometers, past walls covered in artwork that celebrated thousands of years of military victory. The meeting chamber was a vast space filled with floating platforms where alien leaders sat in judgment. But when Jun-Ho entered, something felt different. The Valdari nobles were not sitting in positions of authority looking down at him. They had arranged their platforms in a circle, with an empty space in the center where he could stand and be seen and heard equally by all. Lord Commander Thexra was the supreme military leader of the Valdari Empire. It had personally overseen the conquest of 17 different worlds, watching as thousands of alien warriors died for its entertainment. But when it spoke to Jun-Ho, its voice carried something that sounded almost like uncertainty. "Human Commander," Thexra said, "your species has done something that we did not expect. You have changed the nature of the Grand Hunt itself." Jun-Ho stood in the center of the circle, surrounded by beings that could order his death with a single word. But he did not feel afraid. The events of the past 3 weeks had taught him that these aliens were not the monsters that Earth had feared. They were warriors trapped by their own traditions, unable to imagine any way of being strong except through domination. "Lord Commander," Jun-Ho replied, "we have only shown you what we learned long ago. True strength comes from building others up, not from tearing them down." The alien nobles made clicking sounds as they discussed his words in their own language. Finally, Thexra spoke again. "We offer you a choice that no conquered species has ever received. Join our empire as warrior entertainers. Your people will live, but you will fight for our amusement whenever we command it. This is more mercy than any previous species has been granted." Jun-Ho had expected this offer. His intelligence officers had warned him that the Valdari might try to preserve humans as a source of ongoing entertainment. But he had spent 3 weeks watching his people transform hopeless battles into teaching opportunities. He had learned that humans had something to offer that was more valuable than submission. I thank you for your offer, Lord Commander, Junho said carefully, but I would like to propose something different. The silence in the chamber was so complete that Junho could hear his own heartbeat echoing off the distant walls. What? If the Grand Hunt could become something greater than it has ever been? Instead of conquering species for your entertainment, what if you created a league where civilizations could compete voluntarily? What if warfare became a way for different species to share knowledge and learn from each other? The clicking sounds that followed were rapid and intense. Some alien nobles sounded excited by the idea. Others seemed angry or confused. But all of them were talking, which meant they were thinking about possibilities they had never considered before. Dr. Nari was monitoring the meeting from the human command ship. Through intercepted communication, she could hear Valdari leaders across the Empire debating Junho's proposal. Some called it ridiculous, others called it revolutionary, but none of them were dismissing it entirely. The implications were staggering. If the Valdari could be convinced to transform the Grand Hunt from conquest to cooperation, it would change the balance of power across the galaxy. Dozens of species that lived in fear of alien invasion might instead become willing participants in a new kind of cultural exchange. But the greatest change would be in the Valdari themselves. A species that had defined itself through domination for thousands of years would have to learn an entirely different way of being strong. Lord Commander Thexera finally spoke again, its voice carrying the weight of 3 millennia of military tradition. You propose that we abandon everything that has made us great. You ask us to give up our right to rule over lesser species. You want us to treat our inferiors as equals. Junho looked around the circle of alien nobles, meeting the eyes of creatures that had never been challenged by anything they could not simply destroy. I propose that you discover what true greatness looks like, he said. I ask you to give up ruling over others so that you can learn to rule alongside them. I want you to treat other species as equals because that is the only way to learn what they can teach you. The vote that followed would reshape the galaxy forever. 6 months after the last Grand Hunt ended, Admiral Taesung stood beside Lord Commander Thexera watching something that neither species had imagined possible. The first Galactic Combat League tournament was beginning, and representatives from 12 different civilizations were preparing to compete. The arena looked nothing like the deadly structure where humans had once fought for their lives. Safety barriers surrounded every platform. Medical teams from multiple species waited at the edge of each combat zone. Referees trained in the fighting styles of 6 different worlds monitored every match to ensure fair play and prevent serious injuries. But the biggest change was in the spectators themselves. The seats that had once held only Valdari nobles now contained beings from across the galaxy. Humans sat next to aliens who had been their enemies 6 months ago. Former slave species cheered alongside their previous conquerors. The clicking and scraping of Valdari excitement mixed with sounds that no single species could have understood, alone. Sergeant Yunsu walked onto the center platform wearing armor that would have amazed the fighters who had started this transformation. Her gear combined human engineering with Valdari technology and design principles learned from 3 other species. Her weapons were energy blades that could be set to stun rather than kill, allowing for impressive battles that ended with exhausted competitors rather than dead warriors. Her opponent was a Valdari champion she had fought twice before in previous league matches. They knew each other's techniques, understood each other's strengths, and respected each other's skills. But more than that, they had become friends through their battles, pushing each other to develop new abilities and fighting styles. The crowd cheered for both fighters equally as they began their match. This was not a contest between conqueror and victim, superior and inferior, civilized and primitive. This was a celebration of everything that warriors from both species had learned from each other. The fight lasted 12 minutes and included techniques that neither human nor Valdari martial arts had ever developed alone. Hyunsu used leverage and timing in ways that took advantage of her opponent's forearmed fighting style. The alien champion incorporated human creativity and unpredictability into its traditional precision attacks. When Yunsu finally won by forcing her opponent into a submission hold that required cooperation to escape safely, both fighters were exhausted, both were satisfied, and both had learned something new that they would carry into future matches. The crowd's response was unlike anything from the old Grand Hunt days. Instead of celebrating the victory of one species over another, They were applauding the skill and creativity that both fighters had demonstrated. They were cheering for the idea that competition could make everyone stronger, instead of simply eliminating the weak. Dr. Hyun-woo published her final report on the transformation that afternoon. She had been studying the changes in both human and Valdari culture since the League had been established, documenting the ways that regular voluntary competition had affected both species. The results were remarkable. Humans had become stronger, faster, and more technically skilled through constant training with physically superior aliens. Valdari had become more creative, adaptable, and emotionally intelligent through exposure to human approaches to problem-solving and cooperation. But the changes went deeper than simple skill improvement. Young humans were learning alien languages and technologies at rates that amazed their teachers. Young Valdari were developing interests in human art, music, and philosophy that their parents found both disturbing and fascinating. The two species were not just learning from each other. They were becoming something new together, a hybrid culture that combined the best elements of both civilizations while eliminating the worst aspects of their previous isolation. Captain Min-gyu had been appointed as the first Director of Interspecies Combat Relations, a position that required him to understand the fighting styles, cultural values, and diplomatic needs of 12 different civilizations. His office walls were covered with weapons, armor, and artwork from worlds that had been enemies just months before. His biggest challenge was not organizing the tournaments or maintaining safety standards. It was managing the requests from dozens of other species who wanted to join the League after hearing about what humans and Valdari had accomplished together. The transformation had spread far beyond the original participants. Species that had never communicated before were establishing diplomatic relations so they could compete in League matches. Civilizations that had been isolated for centuries were developing trade relationships and cultural exchanges. The Galactic Combat League had become more than an alternative to the Grand Hunt. It had become a new model for how different species could interact with each other across the galaxy. Competition without conquest, strength through cooperation, victory through mutual improvement. Min-gyu received a communication that morning from a species on the far edge of the galaxy. The Keepers were an ancient civilization that had watched the rise and fall of empires for millions of years, without ever making contact with younger races. But they had been monitoring the League tournaments and wanted to send representatives to observe the next competition. If the Keepers were interested in what humans and Valdari had created together, then the transformation was becoming something truly historic. Species that had never interacted were beginning to see possibilities for contact and cooperation that had never existed before. The final match of the day featured Private Xiang-ho, the human who had started the revolution by laying down his weapons 6 months earlier. He was competing against the same Valdari champion he had first taught. But both of them had changed dramatically since that historic moment. Xiang-ho now moved with some of the fluid grace that characterized Valdari fighting styles. His opponent had incorporated human creativity and emotional expression into its combat techniques. They fought like dancers who had been practicing together for years, each movement flowing naturally into the next, each technique designed to challenge and improve rather than simply to win. The match ended in a draw when both fighters simultaneously achieved positions that would have allowed them to defeat their opponent. Instead of continuing until one of them made a mistake, they chose to acknowledge each other's skill and declare the competition a success for both participants. The crowd erupted in celebration that lasted for 10 minutes. They were not cheering for victory or defeat. They were celebrating the idea that competition could end with both participants becoming stronger than they had been when it began. As the tournament concluded and beings from 12 different worlds prepared to return to their home systems, they carried with them something that had never existed before in galactic history. They carried the knowledge that differences between species could be sources of strength rather than reasons for conflict. The Grand Hunt was over forever. In its place stood something that would reshape the galaxy for generations to come. The universe had learned that the strongest civilizations were not those that conquered others, but those that helped others become strong enough to stand beside them as equals. Years later, historians would mark the end of the Grand Hunt as the beginning of the galactic age of cooperation. But the participants knew better. It was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything that intelligent species could accomplish when they chose to build each other up instead of tearing each other down. The new game had begun, and everyone who played it was winning.